70 deaths. That is what the 2026 North American heatwave has already taken from us. 70 confirmed lives, and August is barely half over. That number is not a projection. It is not a worst-case model output. It is the confirmed toll from a heat event that has now run for nearly 2 full months without stopping. And the data I am looking at this morning tells me the worst chapter of this story has not been written yet. Not even close. Here is what I need you to understand right now. July 2026 just became the single hottest month ever recorded in 132 years of American record keeping. The contiguous United States averaged 76.9 degrees Fahrenheit for the entire month, 3.3 degrees above the 20th century average. And that is not some dusty academic number. That is the temperature your body, your crops, your power grid, and your overnight low had to survive day after day for 31 days straight. The previous record? July 1936. The Dust Bowl. We just beat it. We just beat the Dust Bowl summer. And now we are in August. The ridge is still here. The heat has not ended. That is the story. That is what this video is about. The temperatures climbing across America right now are not the tail end of something. They are the continuation of the most sustained heat siege this country has endured in modern memory. I'm going to break down exactly who is in the crosshairs today and tomorrow, walk you through the 7-day sequence day by day, and then tell you something about the long-range pattern that most analysis this week has completely missed. Stay with me, because the information in the second half of this video is the part that changes how you think about the rest of this summer. Let me place you in the current moment with precision. The Weather Prediction Center issued its short-range forecast discussion yesterday evening, valid as of this morning, Monday, August 17th. The headline was direct and unambiguous. Dangerous heat persists in the south and southeast, while building into the southwest early this week. That one sentence describes the lives of tens of millions of people right now. And that word building, that is the word I want you to hold on to as we go through today's data. Because building implies a direction, and that direction is upward. The immediate heat zone is anchored across a corridor stretching from the western Gulf Coast all the way through the lower Mississippi Valley. Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, all of them baking under the same upper-level ridge. The Shreveport National Weather Service office, which covers the entire 4-state region, including parts of Oklahoma and East Texas, put it plainly in this morning's bulletin. A heat advisory will remain in effect across the entire 4-state region through at least Tuesday. Afternoon heat indices will average between 105 and 109 degrees each day this week. Not on the hottest day, each day, every single afternoon this week. If you live in Shreveport, Texarkana, Tyler, Nacogdoches, Bossier City, Monroe, or anywhere in that corridor, those numbers are your daily reality right now. You step outside at 3 in the afternoon, and the air pressing against you registers as 107 degrees. You breathe it in. You feel it on every exposed inch of skin. And then you go back inside, if you have an inside with air conditioning. Not everyone does. And that distinction between those who do and those who do not is the line that separates a difficult week from a deadly one. Houston and the Gulf Coast are carrying their own version of this burden this morning. The National Weather Service in Houston confirmed that heat indices today will range from 102 to 108 degrees. That number may reach 100 as early as 10 or 11 in the morning, before noon, before the peak of the day. And overnight lows are only dropping to the upper 70s. Your body cannot recover from a heat-stressed day when the overnight low is 78 degrees. That is the physiological trap that turns a hot week into a dangerous one. You go to sleep hot, you wake up hot. You never get the thermal reset. And then the afternoon arrives and does it again. My name is Arthur, and this is US Weather Threat, where we get into the real atmospheric science behind what is happening to the weather around you. If you have never been here before, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We do this level of analysis every time the atmosphere throws something significant at this country, and right now, August 2026 is throwing everything. Let us keep going. The city that commanded my attention most in this morning's data was New Orleans. The National Weather Service office there issued an extreme heat watch for today, Monday, August 17th, from 11 in the morning through 8 in the evening local time. An extreme heat warning had already been issued for last Saturday. Now a watch for Monday. That progression is not standard operating procedure. The New Orleans forecast says the heat index may peak between 110 and 115 degrees this afternoon. In a city where the overnight low will not drop below 80 degrees, where the humidity is structural and relentless, where the built environment absorbs and radiates heat through the night, a heat index of 115 in the afternoon is not a statistic. It is a medical emergency threshold for anyone who cannot get indoors quickly. And here is something that does not get said clearly enough in most coverage. The danger from extreme heat is not distributed equally. It falls hardest on the elderly, on infants, on outdoor workers, on people in vehicles without working air conditioning, on people in older apartment buildings with no insulation from the roof, on people who cannot afford to run the air conditioning because their power bill last month was already 3 times what they budgeted. Heat kills in proportion to vulnerability, and right now, that vulnerability is widely distributed across the Gulf Coast and lower Mississippi Valley. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city and state in the comments. I want to know who is inside this dome right now and what it is actually feeling like where you stand. The 4-state region centered on Shreveport deserves its own pause, because what is happening there is not only a heat story. The same bulletin that issued the heat advisory also flagged fire weather danger. Hot and dry conditions contributing to increased fire danger across the entire 4-state region. Multiple counties and parishes already under burn bans. This is the dual threat signature of a high-amplitude upper-level ridge operating at full intensity. It suppresses rainfall, it superheats the surface, it desiccates vegetation, and it sets the stage for wildfire, even in places people do not normally associate with that risk. Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and parts of Oklahoma and Mississippi are running this dual threat right now. Moving west into the greater Texas region, the numbers from the Fort Worth National Weather Service office this morning told a consistent story. Heat index values up to 107 degrees through this week for most of North, Central, and East Texas, with actual air temperatures between 98 and 103. Heat index values consistently in the 104 to 108 range going into the weekend. San Antonio, Austin, and Corpus Christi are in similar territory. AccuWeather documented heat index values approaching 120 near some Gulf Coast communities during comparable setups earlier this summer. The National Weather Service called it dangerous heat and projected some records would be challenged. Before I walk you through the day-by-day sequence, I want to give you context on why the Midwest and East Coast are watching this story differently than the South and Southwest, and why that difference matters for the national picture. Right now, rounds of shortwaves and frontal boundaries are moving through the northern tier of the country. The WPC mentioned this in this morning's discussion. Rounds of fronts and shortwaves to the north and east of the southern ridge will carry rain and thunderstorm chances to portions of the central United States to the eastern seaboard. That sounds like relief, and for many communities in the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, and the Mid-Atlantic, it genuinely is relief. Temperatures in Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore will moderate somewhat this week compared to the brutal stretches of July. Rainfall will reach areas that have been dry. The jet stream configuration in the northern tier allows the southern ridge to dominate the southern states, while cooler, more active weather returns to the north. But here is the catch. That frontal boundary is not reaching the core of the heat dome. The ridge is too strong and too deep in the atmosphere for these northern frontal systems to penetrate into Texas, Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast states. The northern boundary of the ridge is essentially a wall that the frontal systems slide along without being able to push southward. So you get this stark contrast. Thunderstorms and temperatures in the 80s in Indianapolis and Cleveland, while 2 states to the south, Memphis is hitting 104 with a heat index of 109 and the overnight low barely dips below 80. That contrast, active weather north, brutal, stagnant heat south, is the defining characteristic of the current atmospheric configuration, and it will persist through much of this week before the ridge begins its westward migration. There is also the matter of what is happening in the southwest right now that represents a partial buffer against even worse heat in the immediate term. The North American monsoon is active. Moisture is streaming northward from the Gulf of California and the eastern Pacific into Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. That moisture is generating afternoon and evening thunderstorm activity across the high desert terrain. Those storms bring brief cooling, some rainfall, and brief reductions in fire danger. But the monsoon influence is limited to the afternoon and early evening hours. By the time the monsoon convection dissipates overnight, the residual heat of the day has not fully released, and the timing is critical. The monsoon is most active right now. As the ridge axis migrates westward into the southwest between Wednesday and Thursday of this week, it brings drier air aloft that suppresses the monsoon convection, even as it intensifies the daytime heat. The buffer that the monsoon has provided becomes less effective exactly when the heat becomes most extreme. That is the dynamic to watch for Phoenix and Tucson in particular between Thursday and Saturday. Let me now walk you through the next 7 days day by day, because this pattern does not hold static. It evolves geographically, and knowing the sequence tells you exactly when the most dangerous phase arrives for your region. Monday, August 17th, today. The heat core sits over the lower Mississippi Valley and Gulf Coast. A broad upper-level ridge dominates the southern tier of the country. Heat indices of 100 to 115 from Houston, east through New Orleans, and north through the Shreveport 4-state zone. The southwestern United States has some partial buffering from monsoonal moisture. Scattered storms have been moving northward into Arizona and New Mexico, providing isolated rainfall and temporary pressure on the system. But that partial buffer begins to erode this week. Tuesday, August 18th. The ridge builds westward. The Weather Prediction Center extended forecast discussion described this shift with precision. The southern tier upper ridge will gradually focus across the southwest and southern plains northward into the intermountain west, as troughing slowly deepens in the east. That is the critical sentence in this morning's WPC package. As the east coast sees some trough influence and marginal moderation, the heat does not dissipate. It migrates, it concentrates, and where it concentrates, it intensifies. The Lubbock National Weather Service confirmed that hot temperatures persist into next week, with daily highs in the low 100s off the Caprock in West Texas. Isolated thunderstorms remain possible along the Texas-New Mexico border on some afternoons, with brief wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour and heavy downpours. But those are convective cells on the margins. They do almost nothing to break the underlying high-pressure architecture. Wednesday, August 19th. The ridge axis completes a further westward shift. Southern California, which has been partially shielded by the marine layer and onshore ocean flow, begins to feel the offshore wind component that a westward positioned ridge generates. AccuWeather's senior meteorologist noted that when the ridge sits over the Arizona-Utah border region, an offshore breeze carries interior desert southwest heat toward the Los Angeles basin and San Diego coastline. Historical average high temperatures for Los Angeles in mid-August are in the lower 80s. This stretch may bring upper 90s to the basin, roughly 15 degrees above normal. This is not a local desert phenomenon. It reaches the coast. Thursday, August 20th through Saturday, August 22nd. Mark these 3 days. This is the peak window for the most intense phase of this event across the western and south-central United States. The WPC extended discussion was unambiguous. Hazardous heat continuing across the south-central United States and increasing in the southwest. Phoenix and Tucson will be in the direct path of the ridge core. Death Valley has reached forecast highs of 126 degrees Fahrenheit during comparable ridge events this summer. Highs between 110 and 120 degrees across the desert southwest during this 3-day window are the central forecast, not the outlier scenario. Las Vegas, which ran above 110 degrees for a 6th consecutive day during the July dome, faces renewed extreme heat. Billings, Montana, set an August record at 106 degrees during the earlier phase of this summer. The northern Rockies and High Plains face renewed pressure as the ridge extends northward. More than 12 million people in the Southwest, Mountain West, and Northern Great Plains will fall under Level 4 of 4, the NWS Extreme Heat Risk designation, on Saturday and Sunday. An additional 12 million are under Level 3. Level 4 means the heat will affect anyone without access to cooling and water. Not just vulnerable populations, anyone. Sunday, August 23rd. Marginal relief arrives for portions of the southeast. The trough deepening along the east coast finally begins to erode the ridge on its eastern flank. Some moderation moves into Georgia, the Carolinas, and the Florida Panhandle, but the WPC was explicit about the south-central region. Above normal temperatures will linger well into the final week of August across the southern plains and lower Mississippi Valley. The off switch for this event does not exist in the current forecast. Now I want to step back from the immediate and give you the structural picture, because the most important question is not how hot is it this week. The most important question is why this is happening with such persistent and relentless intensity, and what the atmospheric pattern signals about the weeks ahead. 3 separate heat dome events have now crossed the continental United States since late June. Each one formed, peaked, briefly weakened, and was immediately followed by the next, without meaningful recovery for the regions below. First dome, late June through early July. That week killed at least 44 people. Atlantic City hit 106 degrees on July 4th, tying the city's all-time record. Power failed for 250,000 customers in New Jersey overnight. July 4th celebrations in Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia were curtailed or cancelled. Amtrak slowed train speeds on the Northeast Corridor because the heat was affecting the infrastructure. That was the first dome. Second dome, mid-July, the Southeast again. Lake Charles, Louisiana placed under both a tropical storm warning and an extreme heat warning simultaneously during Tropical Storm Bertha, the first co-occurrence of those two warnings in that area since 2005. The heat index in Lake Charles reached 121 degrees during an active tropical storm, both conditions true at the same time, in the same city, on the same afternoon. Third dome, late July into early August. 40 million people under heat alerts simultaneously. Las Vegas above 110 for a 6th straight day. Death Valley approaching 126. Phoenix and Southern California forecast at 118 to 120 simultaneously. By August 5th, the confirmed death toll from the entire event stood at 70. And now the 4th iteration is building. The ridge is not retreating. It is reorganizing westward and preparing to intensify over the southwestern quadrant of the country. This cadence, dome after dome after dome, each arriving before the region below has recovered from the previous one, is not random weather variability. It is being driven by something structural in the atmospheric circulation, and that structural driver has a name: El Niño. The National Weather Service confirmed El Niño conditions in June, using the phrase Super El Niño when describing the potential evolution of this event. As of the most recent weekly data from the Climate Prediction Center, the Ninyo 3.4 region sea surface temperatures are running 1.3 degrees Celsius above normal, consistent with moderate El Niño strength. But here is what makes this forecast more concerning than most reporting reflects. Climate scientist Zeke Housefather published data this week noting that the rise in Ninyo 3.4 sea surface temperature anomalies over recent weeks has been, in his direct words, nothing short of astonishing. His assessment: the current sea surface temperature anomalies in that region are now warmer than at any comparable point during the 1997 and 1998 Super El Niño event. The 1997 through 98 El Niño is the strongest on record. We are already hotter than that was at the same point in the cycle, and we are still many months from the expected peak of this one. The ocean is still loading energy. The atmospheric response to that loading has produced this parade of heat domes across the summer. As the ocean continues to warm toward its seasonal peak in this El Niño cycle, that atmospheric response is not going to weaken. It may intensify. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center has assigned a 48% probability of very strong El Niño conditions being present during the August through October peak of the Atlantic hurricane season. 81% for the October through December period. Colorado State University cited that same forcing when they revised their 2026 Atlantic hurricane season forecast dramatically downward, now projecting only 9 named storms, 4 hurricanes, and 1 major hurricane for the entire season. The wind shear that El Ninyo generates over the tropical Atlantic is suppressing hurricane development this fall. That is genuinely the only good news in this picture. Every other consequence of this El Niño over the continental United States is making conditions hotter, drier, and more fire-prone. NOAA's August outlook for the contiguous United States reflects all of that signal. The southeast and southern mid-Atlantic carry the highest probability for above-normal heat this month, confidence above 50%. 3 independent physical mechanisms are all pointing toward the same outcome simultaneously. El Niño is one. The dry soil moisture deficit baked into the landscape after a record July is the second. Warm Gulf and Atlantic coastal sea surface temperatures that keep feeding heat and moisture energy into the system are the third. When 3 independent physical mechanisms align on the same forecast, forecaster confidence rises substantially. This is one of those situations. And the forecast does not call for the heat to end. The overnight temperature anomaly is the part of this story that most coverage is not emphasizing, and I think it deserves more attention than it is getting. NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information reported that average overnight lows across the contiguous United States in July 2026 were 64.2 degrees Fahrenheit. That is the all-time record for any month in any season in 132 years of American climate records. Not just the hottest July overnight average, any month, any season, ever recorded in this country. The previous record was July 2022 at 63.5. We exceeded it by 0.7 of a degree. In climate terms, that is not incremental. That is a clear step change. What does that mean at the street level? In Houston and New Orleans and Dallas, overnight lows this summer have regularly sat at 78 to 82 degrees. The human body begins to recover from heat stress only when core temperature begins to drop during sleep. When the overnight low is 79 degrees, that process is severely compromised. You start the next morning already thermally stressed before the first wave of daytime heat arrives. Stack 7 of those nights together, and you have a week that hospital emergency departments feel as a surge in heat exhaustion admissions. The 70 deaths confirmed from this event are the people who reach the end of that physiological chain. The number hospitalized, treated, and surviving is far larger. NOAA's Chief of Monitoring at the National Centers for Environmental Information stated it clearly. Hotter nights are a classic sign of human-caused climate change. The science on this is not speculative. Decades of peer-reviewed literature have documented the accelerating rate of minimum nighttime temperature increase across the contiguous United States. What summer 2026 has done is bring that long-running trend to a threshold that resets every record in the historical dataset simultaneously. The drought dimension amplifies all of it. The NCEI July report confirmed below-average national precipitation despite isolated extreme rainfall events. Texas Hill Country and eastern New York both saw notable flooding in convective events on the margins of the heat dome. But those isolated events did nothing to relieve the underlying soil moisture deficit across the core of the affected region. NOAA's August drought outlook states that drought is expected to persist and expand east of the Rockies, including portions of the Plains and upper Midwest, and the wildfire potential through August is above normal across the Northwest, Great Basin, Central Rockies, portions of the northern and southern plains, and the lower Mississippi Valley, simultaneously. The same ridge of high pressure driving the heat is desiccating every landscape underneath it. Relative humidity in the hottest zones this week is dropping to single digits during afternoon hours in some locations. The Shreveport National Weather Service put a heat advisory and a fire weather message in the same bulletin because the same atmosphere is generating both threats at the same time. Since late June, approximately 280 million Americans, more than 85% of the country's population, have experienced above average or well above average temperatures. Only 2.8 million people have seen cooler than average conditions this summer, concentrated in pockets of coastal California and isolated parts of western Texas. That statistic comes from the analysis of this event released this week. It is not from a sensational headline, it is from the observational record. Through July, the contiguous United States ran through its second hottest first half of any year in the entire historical dataset, and if August closes at the pace the CPC outlook projects, above normal across the south and southeast, with the ridge maintaining its grip, the final summer temperature average for 2026 may challenge or exceed the record summer of 2021. One NOAA climate scientist, looking at the full arc of this data, said something I have not been able to stop thinking about since I read it. This may be one of the coolest years we will experience for the rest of our lives. That is not hyperbole. That is a scientific assessment of a measured trajectory. The records being broken in 2026 may themselves be broken within years, not decades. The baseline is still rising. The events are becoming more frequent. The recovery windows between them are shortening. Have you experienced something this summer that surprised you? A heat record in your city you did not expect? A week where your air conditioner could not keep up? A night where the temperature at midnight was still over 80 degrees? Tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one, and this summer I am hearing from people all over this country who are living through something they have genuinely never experienced in their location before. Let me slow down and spend more time on the specific geography of this heat event, because right now I am watching 5 distinct regional stories playing out simultaneously under the same atmospheric pattern, and each one has its own character and its own threat timeline. The first story is the Gulf Coast story. Houston sits at a unique intersection of risks right now. It is a city of roughly 2,400,000 people sitting directly on the Gulf Coast, where humidity is a constant presence and the heat index regularly exceeds the air temperature by 10 to 15 degrees. The National Weather Service Houston office said it clearly this morning. Hot weather is expected today, with highs in the 90s to triple digits, heat indices ranging from 101 to 107 degrees. Monday brings more of the same, heat indices from 102 to 108. And this pattern holds through the work week. That is 5 consecutive days of heat index values above 100 degrees across one of the largest metropolitan areas in the United States. And the overnight lows provide almost no relief. Houston overnight lows this week are forecast in the upper 70s. The dew point, the actual measure of how much moisture is in the air, is sitting in the mid-70s across much of the Gulf Coast. That is oppressive atmospheric moisture. It is the layer of humidity that makes a 95-degree day in Houston feel fundamentally different from a 95-degree day in Phoenix. In Phoenix, the air is dry. You sweat, and the sweat evaporates, and you cool. In Houston, the air is already saturated. Your sweat does not evaporate efficiently. Your cooling mechanism is impaired. The physiology of heat exposure in a humid environment is categorically more dangerous than in a dry one at the same air temperature. San Antonio is dealing with a slightly different version of the same problem. Further inland, drier air, but the temperatures themselves run higher. Austin and the Interstate 35 corridor from San Antonio through Austin to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex are all in the 100 to 103 range for actual air temperatures this week. Those cities combined hold nearly 10 million people, and the combination of relentless heat, dry conditions, and an aging urban tree canopy from years of drought stress means the urban heat island in each of those cities amplifies the outdoor temperature by another 3 to 5 degrees beyond what the official forecast shows. The second story is the Lower Mississippi Valley story. This is the corridor from Memphis through Jackson, Mississippi, through Baton Rouge to New Orleans. This region has been in a slow-motion heat emergency for most of the summer. Memphis has seen multiple nights this summer where the low temperature remained above 80 degrees. Jackson, Mississippi regularly posts heat index values above 105 from mid-morning through late evening, and the Baton Rouge to New Orleans corridor has been running heat index readings that the NWS categorizes as extreme danger, the highest tier. The reason this region is so dangerous right now is the combination of three factors. First, the air mass over the lower Mississippi Valley is both hot and loaded with moisture from the Gulf. Second, the urban infrastructure in these cities, the older housing stock, the reduced tree canopy, the concentrated heat-absorbing asphalt and concrete, amplifies the outdoor conditions significantly. Third, the overnight recovery window is essentially absent. When the overnight low stays above 78 degrees, the residual heat in buildings, streets, and soil from the afternoon peak is never fully released before the next day's heating cycle begins. The third story is the Southern High Plains story. West Texas, from Amarillo south through Lubbock and Midland Odessa to the Permian Basin. This region bakes differently. The humidity is lower, the landscape is open and exposed. The afternoons reach temperatures in the low to mid-100s, with heat index values that may be only slightly above the actual air temperature, because the dry air allows some radiative cooling, even during peak heat. But the sustained nature of this event, and the combination of heat and drought, is creating a different kind of crisis here, a wildfire and agricultural crisis. The Lubbock National Weather Service office has flagged elevated fire danger repeatedly this month. Ranchers and farmers across the southern high plains are managing livestock and crops in conditions that stress both severely. The cotton crop across the Texas Panhandle and South Plains is under significant heat and drought stress at exactly the point in the growing season when moisture is most critical. The fourth story is the Desert Southwest story, and this is the one I want you to be watching most closely over the next 10 days. Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, and the surrounding communities in Arizona and Nevada have been in a summer-long extreme heat episode. Phoenix in July recorded its third warmest July on record, averaging 96.6 degrees for the month, with only a trace of rainfall. That is not a hot week in Phoenix. That is a month in which the average temperature across all 24 hours of every day was 96.6 degrees. The nighttime low averaged with the daily high across 31 days produced that number. Now the ridge is building westward, and the forecast for the August 19th through 22nd window is putting Phoenix and the broader desert southwest back into life-threatening heat territory. Highs between 110 and 120 degrees. Heat indices that in humid areas would read 140, but even in the dry heat of the desert, sustained exposure at 115 to 120 degrees of actual air temperature is deadly without shade, water, and rest. The NWS Level 4 Extreme Heat Risk designation for that period covers this region explicitly. The heat is dangerous to anyone without cooling, not just certain populations. Anyone. And the fifth story, the one that surprises the most people, is the story now unfolding in the northern Rockies and High Plains. Billings, Montana, set an August daily record earlier in the summer, when temperatures reached 106 degrees. Salt Lake City has had multiple days above 105. The upper ridge extension northward through the Intermountain West during the August 19th through 22nd window brings this kind of anomalous heat back to Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and the higher elevation communities that do not typically prepare for it. Air conditioning penetration is lower in many of these communities. The buildings were designed for cold winters, not extreme summer heat. And when you combine 105-degree temperatures with lower air conditioning availability and populations that are not culturally adapted to extreme heat preparation, you get elevated vulnerability. I want to spend a moment on the wildfire dimension because I think it ties this whole atmospheric picture together in a way that makes the scale of what is happening clearer. NOAA's August wildfire potential assessment listed above normal wildfire risk for the Northwest, Great Basin, Central Rockies, Northern and Southern Plains, Lower Mississippi Valley, and Southern Florida. Look at that geographic spread. That is not a regional wildfire risk forecast. That is a national one. The same ridge of high pressure that is driving the heat is driving the drought and the fire weather simultaneously. The Shreveport North WS office put a heat advisory and a fire weather message in the same bulletin. The Lubbock office flagged fire danger alongside their heat discussion. This is the fingerprint of a high-amplitude ridge that has been in place too long. It has consumed the available soil moisture, dried out the vegetation, and pushed fire conditions into areas that historically see this risk infrequently. The Pacific Northwest is a particular concern. NorthWA's wildfire potential forecast lists above normal fire risk across the Northwest through August. Large wildfires were burning in Oregon and Washington at the end of July, a scene that mirrored what was happening in Europe simultaneously, as the 2026 European heatwaves were described as Europe's hottest summer on record. The global context of what is happening matters. This is not a localized American weather story. This is the atmospheric system of the entire planet, responding to the same underlying forcing. Let me come back to the El Niño science for a moment, because I want to make sure you understand the mechanism clearly, not just the name, but what it is actually doing to the circulation pattern over the United States. Under El Niño conditions, the tropical Pacific Ocean releases enormous amounts of heat and moisture into the upper atmosphere. That warming alters the shape and position of the jet stream. In the summer, El Niño tends to strengthen and extend the subtropical high-pressure ridge that naturally sits over the southern United States. It makes that ridge stronger, more persistent, and more resistant to disruption from systems that would normally push through and break it down. Think of the ridge as a massive dome of compressed descending air. Air descends and warms. Clouds cannot form under descending air, rain cannot fall under descending air. And when that descending air has been warmed by an El Niño-fueled atmosphere above it, the temperatures at the surface become extreme. Normally, the ridge would be disrupted every 10 to 14 days by a passing weather system, a cold front, a trough, a low-pressure system that interrupts the pattern and allows rain and temporary cooling to reach the heat-baked surface. In a strong El Niño summer, those disruptions are weaker and less frequent. The ridge rebuilds faster after each one, and what we have seen this summer, 3 consecutive heat dome events rebuilding one after another with minimal recovery between them, is exactly what the El Niño signal predicted for the summer of 2026. The NOAA Climate Prediction Center issued its El Niño advisory in June and has maintained it through the summer. The CPC's ENSO forecast gives an 81% probability of El Niño persisting through October, November, and December. That means the atmospheric forcing producing this parade of heat domes is expected to be present not just through August, but through the fall season. The intensity of the ridge influence will naturally moderate after the summer peak as the sun angle decreases and the seasonal cycle shifts. But the atmospheric pattern does not flip to neutral overnight. It unwinds slowly. And during that unwinding, the risk of additional extreme heat events in September remains elevated compared to a neutral or La Niña year. I also want to flag something the NOAA August Outlook discussion mentioned that I think carries real importance for how you think about the rest of the summer. The Madden-Julian Oscillation, the planetary scale wave of tropical rainfall that normally circles the globe every 30 to 60 days and provides the most important source of variability in the weather pattern on the 2 to 8 week timescale, has been stalled and disorganized this summer. When the MJO is active, it modulates the ridge pattern, providing periodic breaks and disruptions. When it stalls, the background El Niño signal dominates without interruption. And that is exactly the situation the CPC described in its August Outlook discussion. The MJO's eastward progression has stalled. The El Niño background signal is running the atmospheric show without a competing modulator, until the MJO reorganizes and moves eastward through the Indo-Pacific, a process that the CPC expects to begin before August ends, but would take time to translate into a clear atmospheric signal over North America. The ridge pattern has more freedom to maintain itself. That is another reason the WPC is using the phrase long-duration heatwave rather than another heat dome event. Duration is the key word, not intensity alone, not geographic breadth alone, but sustained, persistent, prolonged heat without an effective atmospheric disruption mechanism. Here is the summary picture. The contiguous United States is in the middle of the most thermally anomalous summer in 132 years of recorded data. The warmest month ever recorded ended 9 days ago. The second hottest first half of any year in the dataset just closed out in July. And the forcing mechanisms that drove that summer, El Niño strengthening a stalled MJO, warm coastal sea surface temperatures, deep soil moisture deficits are all still in place, and in some cases, still intensifying. The next 10 days will see the heat dome migrate westward, bringing the most dangerous phase of this event to the desert southwest and Intermountain west, between August 19th and the 22nd. The south-central United States will see only marginal relief as that migration occurs. The east coast will see the most meaningful moderation, but above normal temperatures will persist coast to coast through the end of August, with the highest risk concentrated in the southern tier and the southwest. I said earlier this video that most coverage has missed something in the long-range pattern. Here is what that is. The model's beyond 10 days, and I want to be clear that predictability at that range is limited, as showing a continuation of the above-normal ridge pattern into the first week of September. The Euro ensembles and the GFS ensembles are not showing a clean pattern break. They are showing a gradual modulation, not a collapse. What that means is that the month of August may close out with above-normal temperatures still in place across much of the south-central and southwestern United States. And the first couple of weeks of September, historically a period when the worst of summer heat begins to wind down across the southern tier, may run warmer than normal as the El Niño influence persists. I will be watching those model runs carefully and updating you as the signal becomes clearer. The 14-day range is where forecast uncertainty is high, but the trend in the ensembles is a data point worth noting. If the models are right, this is not a summer that ends cleanly at the end of August. What does that mean for you practically? It means the adaptations you are making right now, the cooling centres, the water habits, the avoidance of peak afternoon heat, the checking on neighbours, need to remain part of your behavioural framework through September. The heat safety practices that apply in July and August apply whenever the heat index is above 100 degrees. And if the long-range signal holds, parts of the south and southwest may be living with those conditions into September. The NOAA Climate Prediction Centre's 6 to 10-day and 8 to 14-day outlooks both show above-average temperatures locked over the south and southeast with high probability. The southeast and southern mid-Atlantic have the best statistical odds for above-normal heat in August, with confidence above 50%. That is a confident statement from a probabilistic forecast. It does not mean every day will be a record. It means the overall thermal average across the period will run above where it should be for this time of year. And given that where it should be for this time of year already involves temperatures in the 90s across much of the south, running above that baseline is materially significant. I think the most important thing I can leave you with today is not a specific forecast number. It is a framework. The heat you are experiencing this summer is not happening to you. It is happening through you, through the accumulated energy in the ocean, through the atmospheric circulation response, through the feedback loops between dry soil and suppressed rainfall and intensified heat. Understanding the mechanism does not make it less dangerous, but it does give you the ability to anticipate what is coming next, rather than being surprised by it. Tomorrow, I will be back with updated model data. Tonight's GFS and Euro runs will give me the best picture yet of the ridge position heading into the August 19th through 22nd peak window for the southwest. If there is a significant shift in the forecast, a strengthening of the ridge, a weakening, a change in the most dangerous zone, I will have that for you in tomorrow's video. If this breakdown gave you clarity on something you did not have before, share it. Send it to someone in Phoenix or in Houston or in Las Vegas who needs to understand what the next 2 weeks look like for their region. Hit the like button if the data was useful, and subscribe if you want to stay ahead of what this pattern does next as the summer moves toward its close. We will see you in the next one.